Okay, I see that just about 2 or 3 hands right now. Now let me ask you another question. Who can say about themselves right now, I am the worst of sinners? Really? These are not just words. When I say that I'm the worst of sinners, it means that I'm the worst of all. So who can say today, I am the worst of sinners?
The Apostle Paul said he was the worst.
Okay, now we go to somebody else. But the question is, who can say about themselves now, I am the worst of sinners? Okay. As our brother pointed out, we know that Apostle Paul said about himself, I am the worst of all. I am the worst of sinners. Now I want to confess to you something. When I read that, when I studied that passage, I was like, I understand if you would say, you Paul, if you would say that I have done some really bad things in my life. I would understand that. Yeah? You've persecuted the church. You killed innocent people. Or maybe you didn't kill them yourself, but you are part of the group that was trying to do that. You've made the life of so many people, so many good people, you've made their life a really hard one. Because of you, you've left children without fathers probably, or mothers. We don't know exactly how many had to suffer because of what Paul did. But I also know about Paul that he did those things because he knew that that was the right thing to do. That's what he thought. He was thinking that I am doing what God wants me to do. Those people that call themselves Christians are going against the teachings and what God has taught us that we should believe and the way we should live. So why would Paul, and that's why I ask myself, why would Paul say something about himself like this? Why would he say, I am the worst of sinners? I mean, just think of world leaders, even from his time, that killed not just a few compared to Paul, that killed thousands and thousands, probably tens of thousands of people that died because of their pride or because of their willingness to get riches or to get power or whatever. Just think of other people that have lived before Paul, that have done so much bad things in this world. Why would Paul say, I am the worst of all? And many times, sadly, when we read something in the Bible that doesn't agree with how we see things or with our reason, sometimes we might be tempted to say, oh, he didn't really mean it. If he says that he's the worst of all, he didn't want to say that he's the worst. He just wanted to say that he feels that he's a sinner. Now, everybody's free to do with the Bible whatever they want to do, and everybody's free to suffer the consequences, good or bad, of treating the Bible the way they treat the Bible. But as far as I'm concerned, I like to treat the Bible and I like to read the Bible just as it is. So, for me, if Paul said that he thinks that he's the worst of sinners, then that's what the truth is. But I still wasn't able to reconcile that with myself. And I said, if Paul says that he's the worst of sinners, then I am at least as bad as he is. But you know what my problem was? I did not see myself that way. And I was surrendered to God. I was there. I was with him, and I was honest with him. I was studying that passage, and I was telling God, I said, I don't see myself this way. I'm not perfect. I know that. I've made mistakes. I've made bad choices in my life. But I don't see myself such a bad person. When I look at myself, I cannot say that I'm the worst of all. I know a lot of people who are worse than I am. I was talking with God, and I was telling him this, and I said, God, show me. I want to know. I want to understand. You know what my mistake was? What I was doing wrong? I was looking where? To others, and then to myself. So I look to others and I look to myself. That is the result. I'm better than most of the people I know. That's what I thought about myself. And not in a proud way. I was honest with God and with myself. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing the other. I'm not doing the other. I'm not as bad as other people are. Do you remember somebody in the Bible who did the same? Who came to the temple and he started to say, yeah, God, I'm so thankful to you because I'm not doing. That's how I was thinking at that time. I'm looking back and I realized that was exactly my thinking. I was, God, thank you because I'm a better person than other people. But then God patiently, he took his time with me. He started to show me and to teach me that I'm not supposed to look at others. And I'm not supposed to look at myself. But I'm supposed to look at Jesus. I'm supposed to look at him. And the more I looked at him, the more I realized, and I remember so clearly, I don't remember the date, but I remember the experience when I was again honest before God and I said, God, I don't know anybody who is worse than I am. Nobody. And I was able to say that in all sincerity, and I was looking, I was even saying, yes, but that person killed so many people. But I was saying to myself, I don't know the past of that person. I don't know why he made that choice. I don't know why he or she did those things. But I know why I am doing the things that I'm doing. And I know what you have done for me. And I know that you can give me the power not to do those things. And I know this and this about myself. And when I look at myself, because I have looked at you in the first place, now I can say that I do not know anybody who is worse than I am. But you know, somebody might say, but if you think this way, you might get depressed. Or you might start to have like problems with negative self-image, or how do you say? I don't remember the word. Self-esteem. That's exact. That's the word. Self-esteem. Is it true? We might get issues with self-esteem if we think like this about ourselves. I don't know anybody who is worse than I am. When? When can we have those issues? Exactly. It's right for me to say that Doreen, I don't know anybody who's worse than me. But if I will stop here, then I will have those issues. But if I will say, I don't know anybody who's worse than me, but I know somebody who is way better than I am, and I know that somebody wants to live in myself, wants to make me like he is, then I will not have issues with self-esteem. Because I will see myself, although I see that my carnal nature, my sinful nature, in my sinful nature, I'm worse than anybody that I know. When I look at Jesus, I know that in him, through him, I am as good as he is. Let me ask you another question. How many of us here have been at some point in our lives almost ready to give up because we thought, I just cannot do this again? We have made so many mistakes, or we have made the same mistake over and over and over again. Maybe some of us are struggling or have struggled in the past with a type of bad habit, or with an addiction, or with just a bad attitude, or whatever. And we went to God and say, God, please forgive me, I've done this again. Help me not to do it again. And for some time, it worked. But then again, we found ourselves doing the same thing. And then we went to God again. And then we did it again. And then we went to God. And then we did it again. Have you ever reached that point when you said, I don't want to do this again. I want to give up. And whatever happens with me will happen with me. I really don't care anymore. If God will want to save me, He can save me. If He doesn't want to save me, He can do whatever. But I cannot fight, and I don't want to go through all this cycle like sinning, forgiveness, I sin, I ask for forgiveness, and so on. How many of us have been to that point at least once in life? Probably. I don't know you, so I cannot say. Probably somebody, even right now, thinks this way. Probably somebody is tempted to think this way, to say, it's too hard. And I don't want to go through this process again and again. So I will just give up. And whatever or whomever I am, that's how and what I am at the moment. And whatever happens, happens. What about David? You know David, right? Who was David? What was David? A leader to God's people. Okay? His influence was amazing. His power was great. His riches were a lot. What else he was? A king. What else? Okay, he was a shepherd also. What did you say? Okay, we can say also that. I mean, for sure we can say that because that's what God said about him. Was he a prophet? Okay, let me ask you, because when we think about prophet, we might think about something very specific. Was he one of the authors of the Bible? He was inspired by God to write one of the most wonderful things we can find in the Bible, the Psalms. He was a very smart, very powerful man, and inspired by God. But let me ask you something. He did something that I don't believe any of us here have ever done in our lives or will ever do in our lives. He didn't just choose to take somebody else's wife. Okay? Some people today might be guilty of this sin. But what he did is that he killed the husband of that wife so nobody will find out about what he did. And that man was a wonderful person. Remember when he came from war, he came back home because David called him. He went to David, he ate, he drank, and then David told him, go back to your house now, spend some time with your wife. You are tired, just do something that will comfort you. What did he say? How can I do this? How can I go home and enjoy the time with my wife when my brothers are over there fighting, endangering their lives? I cannot do that. Do you realize how that sounded for David? Because he was doing exactly the same thing. While his brothers were fighting, he was at the palace, resting and having a nice time there. But he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And still, David killed that person. Now, how would you describe this in today's world? if you are going to use the words, if you are going to find out about this in the news, that a powerful man took somebody else's wife, and then he killed that man so nobody will find out about it. And that man was way better than he was, at least at that point in time. How would you call that person? Okay? I think it's a word that we might not like to say it, but it's so true. How can you do something like this? And David didn't stop here. For a whole year, he did other things, so nobody will find out. He kept lying, abusing his power to keep this a secret. Now, how many of you have done this? I don't think anybody have done this here. So we might look at our lives and say, yes, I understand what you say, but you don't know what I did. That's why it's hard for me to go back to God. That's why it's hard for me to really believe that He has forgiven me. That's why it's easier for me to give up. But I point to David. Whatever you have done, I don't think it's as worse as what David did. What did God do? Did he go to David and shook him and say, how could you do something like this? I will send my thunders and... He sent Nathan, and he sent Nathan with a nice story. Because God's intention is not, His purpose is not to punish people for what they have done. God's purpose is not to destroy the sinner. He wants to save the sinner. He wants to save me. He wants to save you from the habit, from the whatever issue you might have, or somebody else that you might know have in their lives. So God sent Nathan there, and He told him, go do something for David. And Nathan went with that story, and then David, and that's what's happening. David was so passionate about, how can somebody do something like this? That person is worthy of, I don't know if he said that person is worthy of dying. Do you know if he said something like that? I don't remember if he said that it's worth, but he said something like, how can somebody do it? That person is bad, is a bad person. And that's what happens many times. I look at myself in the past, when I was being with this attitude, sometimes toward people. And when I look at myself, I realize that, but I was doing exactly the same thing, if not even worse. That's what sin does to us. When we do something bad, we tend to condemn others for what they are doing, although what they are doing, it might not be as bad as the things that we do. And that's what David did. But God, again, had patience with him. He said, okay, you are that man, David. And that was his breaking point. He repented. And as our sister here said, God called David a man after my own heart. Somebody else might say, yeah, I understand, but David did those things. David did that for a very short time. Out of 70-something years that he lived, he had 1 year when he made bad choices. But for the rest of his life, he made good choices. If you want, let's open the Bible in 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 21. 2 Kings chapter 21. is the story of Manasseh, one of the kings, or how do you pronounce it? Manasseh? All right. One of the kings in Judah. And we will read, I won't read the whole story. If you want to read it for yourself later on, please do it. I will read a few verses. Verse 1, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah. Do you know who his father was? Do you know who Hezekiah was? Was that king that God told him, you will die. He said, God, no, please, please, please don't kill me now. I want to live more. And he lived more. And afterwards, he did those two big mistakes. First of all, we can say that it was a mistake. The second one, we can say not that it was his mistake, but God knew what was happening. He had this son, Manasseh. The first one was that when the people from Babylon came to visit him, he started to brag about his riches and everything that he had. And when those people from Babylon saw his riches, they said, okay, this is a really nice place to come back to, not to help them, but to enjoy the riches. And they did that. And he did evil. That's verse 2. In the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord has cast out before the children of Israel. And then it continues saying what were the things, the bad things that he had done there. Verse 6. Also he made his son pass through the fire, practiced soothsaying, used witchcraft, and consulted spiritists and mediums. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. This habit of passing your son to fire, what were they doing? It's not that they were burning, like they were just putting their sons in fire to die. They were building a fire, and then they were passing their children to the fire. And if that person, because they couldn't have survived, if they survived, it meant that this child is chosen by God. If he died, he or she, then that's it. God didn't like them too much. That's what the habit was. But it says here that he practiced soothsaying, witchcraft, consulted spiritists and mediums. This guy was not just a bad person. He was in direct contact with Satan. Satan was his counselor. Satan was the one that was controlling, that was telling him what to do, how to do it, whom you do those things. It also says that in verse 16, moreover, Manasseh shed very much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to another, besides his sin by which he made Judah sin in doing evil in the sight of the Lord. And if you go to 2 Chronicles chapter 33, Second Chronicles chapter 33, it also says, in verse 9, 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verse 9, so Manasseh seduced Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord had destroyed before the children of Israel. This king was responsible for influencing his people in doing more evil than the people asked Israel, than the people that God asked Israel to destroy because they were so evil. He brought Israel lower than the people that God destroyed because of their sins. Do you know for how long he did this? How old was he when he became king? 12. Do you know when he decided to change his life? Because he did. How old was he? 50-something. So he did these things for at least 40 years. This guy was a murderer, was a liar, was a spiritist. He killed so many people that it says that blood was flowing through Jerusalem. Can somebody of us say today, I have done these things? No. Then God, again, came to Manasseh. The way he came to Manasseh is that, he came to Manasseh through some pagan kings. They took him into captivity, and when he found himself in captivity, he went back to his God. And he asked for forgiveness. It says in verse 12 from 2 Chronicles 33, now when he was in affliction, he implored the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers and prayed to him. And he received his entreaty, heard his supplication, and brought him back to Jerusalem into his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. This is what sin can do to us. But this is what God can do to sinful people. Why would God wait for Manasseh 40 years to do all those bad things? Why would God allow Manasseh to live for 40 years while destroying so much? I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm not saying that there is not an answer to this question, but I personally do not have an answer to this question. If I look to Manasseh, I can understand. God gave him a chance to repent. But when I look at the life that he destroyed, I cannot give you an answer. But what I can tell you, because the Bible is telling us, is that none of us here today can say or can give up saying, I am too bad of a person. I have done too much harm. I have hurt too many people. Nobody can say that. Yes, when we look at ourselves, we can say, I am a bad person. When we look at ourselves, we can even say, as Paul said, I am the worst of all. But when we look in the Bible, the way God treated people that were bad, really bad, none of us here can say, I want to give up. None of us here can say, my habit, my choices, my past, it is too much for me. Yes, we can say that. It is too much for me. But it is not too much for God. Why? Amen. Not because he loved us. And I will say again, our sin is not too much for God because he loved us. Our sin is not too much for God because he already paid the price for any sin that we might have committed. He already went through the suffering and through the anguish and through everything bad that sin can bring over us. He already did that. And there is no amount of sins that Jesus' sacrifice cannot cover if we allow him to do that. There is no amount of sins. If somebody will lose salvation, it will not be because they have sinned too much. If somebody will lose salvation, it's because they will say to God, I do not want to be saved. People will not be burning or dying at the end of times because they were too bad on this earth. People will die because they have rejected God's gift for them. If you are tempted to say, I want to give up, I just cannot do this anymore, don't do it. Never, never give up. And if you say, I guess, but I do not know how to deal with this problem, that's okay. Just take hold of God's hand because He is there with you. I'm not telling this story too many times, and you will understand why. I was in the seminary. So I was one of those who were supposed to teach people how to come to God, how to be happy with God. But because I gave my life to God when I was probably 17, 18, between that time, for 17, 18 years, I lived my life doing whatever I liked. I didn't do, like, bad things, as some might say. But I look back and I realize that I have lived my life according to one big principle. What do I want to do now? Doesn't matter the consequence. And after 17 years of doing this, you will pick up some bad habits. And I remember I was 20-something. Again, I was surrendered to God. I was happy with Him. But I remember I went back from school. We had a vacation. I went back to school. And one of my issues at that time was to go and watch all kinds of things on TV. And I knew that it was. And that was a big temptation for me. And I remember that one day, this was the room where we had TV. We had a TV. We lived in Romania, as I told you. We had a nice room in the house. Then we had the bed. Anyway, it was a bit different than it's here. I remember even now, I knelt down. Here was the door. I knelt down and I was crying and saying, God, please, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to go in this room and turn on the TV, make something to eat and watch TV and eat and watch TV for hours and hours and hours and hours. I don't want to do this. Please help me. You know what happened? Went in there and I did my thing. And I remember that I was there on the couch, crying and eating and watching. But you know what else I knew at that time? I knew that if God will come right now, I will not go to hell, if I call it hell. You understand what I mean? But I will be with Him. Why? Because I knew that maybe some other time I will tell you what was my issue, why I couldn't resist that temptation. But I knew that I wanted to be strong, but I couldn't. And I knew that God will not be like, oh, Doreen, I'm sorry, you made the wrong choice. My God is not like this. So if you find yourself in this situation, when you honestly, you with God, and you say, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to do this anymore. But you still find yourself doing it. Do not turn your back to God. Do not give up. He will show you what you are missing. He will show you something that you might not understand. But that moment is the moment when you need God most. And do not let Satan to tell you, oh, you are a bad person because you are doing this. Yes, I am doing this. But I don't know how to stop. Somebody here might say, but what you say here sounds a bit dangerous. Because it sounds like you are trying to give excuses for sin. I'm not saying that. There are people who choose to make the wrong things, although they can stop themselves. But there are people who are struggling for whatever reasons. They don't want to do those things. but for whatever reason, they find themselves doing them again and again. That's what I'm talking about. You can call it addiction. Some people don't have addictions, but they have issues in their life that they come. For me, that thing happened like when I went home. When I was at the seminary, when I was studying, when I was going to churches to preach, I didn't have issues. But when I went home, after a few months, 5, 6 months, 3 months, that's when I had the issue. So I don't know what your problem is if you have this kind of issue. But what I'm here to tell you this morning, do not give up. God is here, and we will close with the verse that we had for the Bible reading. What does he say there? For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. We might look at David and say, yes, David was forgiven, but you remember that he also had to suffer consequences. Why did he suffer those consequences? Were those consequences the wages for sin? Think of this, because it's essential how we treat ourselves and how we treat our children. Are those consequences or even punishments from God for sin? Is he punishing us, or is he sending those things, or he's allowing those things to come to us because we have sinned? If we think that those are there because we have sinned, what we say is that Jesus paid the consequence for my sin, but I also paid the consequence for my sin. And this is part of what it means that I'm saved by my works. Jesus already paid all the consequences for sin. If God allows or sends punishments or consequences in my life, those are not there mainly because I have done something bad. Those are there so that I will not do that again, and other people might be warned of what can happen. Whatever I'm suffering in my body because of my wrong choices, in my mind, in my family, or whatever, that is not a consequence for sin. That is something that God allowed to come so that I will stay away from the sin. Because he had already paid the consequence. He already went through that. What we need to understand is that the consequence for sin is not that my first or my son will die, as it happened to David. The consequence for sin is death. What kind of death? Not just eternal, but the one that Jesus suffered on the cross. That death is so terrible that although he was crucified, and that's one of the most, if not the most, painful way of dying, he was so less affected by the physical pain because his internal pain was so big. Remember what he said when he was on the cross? He didn't say, it hurts so much. He didn't say, I wish to die faster because I cannot take it anymore. What was his complaint? If I can call it a complaint, although it wasn't a complaint, it was, what did he say?
Why have you forsaken?
That's it. When he was not able to see God, that is something that we cannot even imagine how bad it is. That is the consequence for sin, and he paid it. The separation from God. Even when we sin today, we don't feel that because the Holy Spirit is still working on our hearts. So again, do not give up. Never. Amen? Amen.
Our closing hymn will be number 487, In the Garden.
be an issue with the station today. Our dear Father, we are amazed by how you are, what you are. Our selfishness, our wrong choices are one thing, but when we look at your love, when we look at how you treat us, when we look at what you have done for each one of us, even those things fade away because we love so much and we look so closely to who you are, to what you are. Please help each one of us here, especially those of us who are struggling with different things in our lives. Help us not to take our eyes from you. Help us to focus on you, not on ourselves, not on what we do, bad or good. Help us to look at Jesus. Help us to see you through Jesus. Help us to see us and the others through your eyes. Help us to treat one another the same way you are treating us. Help us to treat ourselves as you treat us. Help each one of us here not to give up, never to give up. In Jesus' name we have prayed. Amen.